All right, good evening. My name is Kyle Magatelli from the Student Doctor Network. I'm joined by Dr. Emil Chuck, the Head of Advising Services for the Health Professional Student Association, to discuss waitlist offers in the professional health school application process. Dr. Chuck, how are you doing tonight?
Good evening. I hope you're doing well.
Good enough. I am good enough. Anybody who has questions, please drop them in the chat. We will be able to answer those. So, to kick things off, for those who were interviewed before October, when should they hear back?
So I'm hoping that many of you that are accessing this recording are probably a little bit anxious. Many of you who've been interviewed before October, hopefully, if you're talking about medical school for the most part, it is, we're all crossing our fingers because the month of October generally tends to be the first month where most health professions, or at least most of the medical schools, will issue offers of admission. Many of the DO schools have done it already, but this is the first month that you will start hearing back from many programs that have hopefully interviewed you prior to October 1st, and you'll hear back from them. Now, the usual process is this early on, and I would expect this week. Today is whatever, October 5th. As early as October 1st, many applicants for early decisions spots have already or should have already gotten notification of how their process went. Hopefully you were advised beforehand that, the nice part is that you get to know whether you got your seat or not very, very early in the process. The bad news is if you didn't get it early, then you only applied to that one school and you have a very, very limited amount of time to turn around and apply to more schools under the regular decision process. There's no guarantee that because you were waitlisted in early decision that you would be given a seat later on in time. So for those of you who are in the throes of early decision or have heard back from early decision, that should have already occurred, and you should be making a decision now or as soon as you possibly can to submit applications through regular decision if you were not already accepted through early decision. Now that leaves just about everybody else. MD PhD has its own little timeline in terms of when they will get off, when they will be told when they have offers extended to them. But generally, the timeline still exists that they should hear sometime between now and probably February or so forth. So the usual timeline that exists for MD PhDs. If you are interested, we have our physician scientist subforum where there are a lot of experts and a lot of people who are involved in the admissions process at the faculty level can give a little bit more insight about what's been happening or what seems to be happening when it comes to interviews for MD PhD as well as decisions for MD PhD. So we'll set that one aside, but they will likely line up very closely to the timeline for regular decision for AMCAS programs. So for AMCAS, we anticipate that first offers can go out as early as mid-October. It's not necessarily all synchronized together. It's not like dental school admissions, which we do celebrate Dental Decision Day in mid-December, where the first time any offers go out usually happens there for dental schools. But for most medical schools, October 15th likely is the first that you would normally hear back from most schools about seats for regular decision. Now, not everybody will hear back. It just basically green lights the admissions teams to say you can begin extending offers on that date. Most schools will not extend their entire class, their set of offers to fill their entire class in mid-October. They may wind up, in most cases, they'll probably take their time, just because if you probably haven't heard from admissions teams already, we routinely are always busy and routinely still looking at applications even at this stage of the game. So it will take time for a lot of schools to still go through every single one of the applications that they've received from people who've submitted applications to them. And it just may take just a little bit of time if you happen to have submitted. Now, again, that's all I can pretty much tell you. When should you expect to hear back? I think the earliest that I think a lot of schools will tell you is if you got an offer, you begin to hear about it in mid-October. You may hear from schools that have interviewed you and say, just letting you know, we've put you on a wait list. And who knows when they will tell you when you're off the wait list. They have until obviously when you get a little bit closer to the spring to tell you that. I've written a couple of articles already on Student Doctor Network that kind of highlight for you a hypothetical situation where an admissions committee basically takes many, many months to completely fill its class, to be as fair as they possibly can to people who submit their applications earlier on in the process, but to a certain extent. So hopefully you will hear back from schools that you've interviewed at. But there's no guarantee that you're going to hear anything definitive until likely, certainly closer to when decisions have to be made, such as in February or March when Choose Your Medical School usually comes up. So, if I know it's one of those frustrating things to not be able to hear back from a lot of schools, but be as patient as you possibly can. That's about all I can say in a general broad brush sense.
Sounds good. Again, any questions you guys have, please drop them in the chat, and Dr. Chuck will be able to answer those. So, for those not interviewed yet, should they send letters of interest? Should they send other communication?
So, if you've not gotten an invitation to interview, what the month of October brings is offers to certain people that have already been interviewed who likely hold other interview spots at other places. So for those of you who haven't interviewed yet, it would be a pretty good time to just say hello to all of those schools that you are waiting to hear from, saying and indicating that you are still interested in their program. Be very brief, certainly be very professional. It's really important that you give as positive an impression as possible that you mean business, that you are waiting to hear back from them. You could possibly put in a little bit of an update, but be very clear what attracts you to that particular school, and just make sure that it is written as professionally and concisely as possible. Concisely is probably a very important term here. We do not want pages and pages of emails or anything that just expounds very, very lengthy updates. We just want to know that we want to see you just basically say you're very interested in hearing back from the school, and be as very brief with your rationale, with your update, with your expression of interest, and we'll see what we can do from there. Now, should they send other communication? Again, depends on your scenario and your situation. If you have an update or an academic update that's included. For the most part, please stay in your lane when it comes to the methods of communication that the school asks from you. In some cases, email should be fine, but if you are given an application portal with an opportunity to upload or message the admissions committee directly within the portal, so it's not really email, it's an intercom communication, direct message or whatever you would call it, use that. It's there for a reason and it's there for a purpose, and you probably will get a little bit faster, I would say, response, but I'm not sure if I would talk about like responding to you. Maybe they'd acknowledge that your email or your communication came in, but you'd hopefully at least get someone to have at least noticed that you've sent them an update or some follow-up communication in that process. So should use anything else outside of what you are expected to use? I think you should be really careful about it. For example, there will be a lot of people who are currently in the applicant pool who are waiting for an interview invitation, and they attend recruiting events. Be very careful about that, partly because recruiting events are obviously meant for people who are not currently applicants. They will basically say a lot of things that you should have probably known before applying. So if you hadn't heard from them before, it's not necessarily great that you all of a sudden show up and you're a current applicant and you're hearing some of this information, and basically what comes out of your mouth is, hey, I'm interested in your school. When can I hear from you for getting an interview? It's not necessarily the most effective way of reaching out to your admissions team. So Please stay within whatever the expected guidelines are. Pay attention if a program is really not meant for you as a current applicant. And just pay attention to, how a lot of these schools really would receive information. This is a very challenging and difficult process. You're going to get a lot more non-responses than positive or any sort of acknowledgments. So, just do the best that you can and don't sound way too desperate. Don't send way too many emails within a short period of time. Don't make us concerned about you. So I guess that's probably one of the only things that I can tell you. I think for TMDSAS, and we have experts on TMDSAS, many of those schools are pretty clear about what they do in their process. They have their pre-matching, which certainly is very unique for TMDSAS. You can kind of get a good sense if you're a Texas resident about the pre-match and what that actually means. Again, it's a decision on their side of the house where they have said they will indicate to you that you are one of their more highly preferred applicants, that when push comes to shove later on, when you have to do your matching, if I'm accurate with the way that the process works, if you rank that a school that has pre-matched you as your top choice, that's pretty much a guaranteed ticket to say you're going to that school. That's the particular nuance of the TMDSAS match. And we have a lot of other experts, and certainly TMDSAS has many videos or many other resources that explains the match process a little bit later, especially for those of you who are non-residents who you have to wait for the regular match process to happen anyway. But every school should have a pretty good idea about announcements. Some schools have specific dates or timelines or milestones where they say they will send information out, if whether you're interviewed or not interviewed. So if they haven't made that clear, probably just check in with the admissions team. If it's not already on their website, they hopefully will point it to you. But just be mindful, be respectful, be professional when it comes to sending any follow-up communication indicating you are still available for any possible interviews that could interview spots that could open up, especially now that with offers, a lot of people holding some interview spots might be more willing to let them go, which is really one of the reasons why most people will consider sending some sort of a follow-up communication during the month of October.
Okay, that's very straightforward. Thank you. Also, in the applicant portals, when you complete an application, a letter will populate, and some schools say specifically, don't contact our admission office. If they say that, please don't send them a letter. All right, next question. For those who got waitlisted after interviewed, my grammar this week. Anyhow, should they send letters of interest or updates?
So this comes up a lot on forums in terms of the terminology, in terms of letters of interest, letters of updates, whatever else like that. So if you get lucky, I guess is the nice way of putting it, and indicate it, and you're told that, hey, thank you for interviewing with us. At this time, we've put you on our wait list, and hopefully you will hear from us later on in time, whatever that will actually be. So what does that actually mean? If you go to the articles that we have written, or even on our forums, you will hear a lot of us talk about the so-called priority ladder or the staircase model, whatever you want to call it. And there's no way for us to know where you land on the staircase model in terms of your priority of receiving an interview, or receiving an offer. Typically, in the typical sense, most people who get an offer very early are ones that really demonstrate that they have the closest alignment to mission fit with the particular school extending them an offer based on the information in their application. So there's many, many, many more people who get waitlisted than get offers, especially very early on. So for those of you who got waitlisted after interviews and it's October, should you send a letter of interest or updates? I mean, it is certainly up to you. It depends on what the school expects from you. There are certain schools that really would welcome those types of follow-up letters or any updates, any letters of interest saying, well, I'm still interested in you. Thank you for telling me what my status is. And, I hope that there will be an opportunity for you to consider my file and so forth from there. So I think there's certain things that are very important to note when we use the terminology letters of interest. Certainly, if it's been a while since you've had your interview, meaning it's been over 4 weeks since you did your interview with the school, if you've done your thank you notes, you can basically reinforce what you'd mentioned back then. Again, keep it brief, keep it professional, don't sound desperate. Then you can do that. For many of you for which there have been updates, again, if you did your interview and it's been over 4 to 6 weeks that you actually talked to anybody, you might want to consider an update or something of that nature, just to make sure people know, hey, I'm very strongly interested in your school. I would certainly recommend that if you are on a wait list and it's a school that you really have high on your own priority list, establish a calendar schedule on your own personal calendar, just to remind you when to actually follow up with certain schools. I can assure you that a cadence of following up with a certain school and checking in on a daily basis is not going to help you. Maybe even a weekly basis might be a little bit too cringy, a little bit too weird. So be very strategic. If it's 1 month or 3 or 4 or 5 weeks or so, just kind of think about that in mind. Certainly the winter holidays are going to come up, whether you do that as an email or, you just express your interest at that time point when hopefully you may have gotten another interview or something, be very professional, be very aware that, give them an update about, your interest, your continued interest in the school, and who knows what happens. I guess that's the only thing that I can tell you. But just be very strategic about it. And, just make sure you pay attention to whatever instructions that each admissions office gives you in their admissions portal about those types of updates and letters of interest. So I would certainly say a lot of people will send some sort of follow-up communication, but it's up to you to not make yourself seem less than professional or less than coherent or in terms of the ways that you at least present yourself again professionally to the admissions committees or anybody else that reads this follow-up information.
Okay. Any questions you guys have, please drop them in the chat. What if I am not successful with the TMD SAS pre-match?
Okay, so for those of you who are Texas applicants, and it turns out that you did not get a pre-match, it's not the end of the world. There's, of course, the regular match process that comes a little bit later on. Again, we have a few people who are a little bit more, or at least one expert who is very, very experienced in the match and the pre-matching type process. So, don't lose hope with it. Basically go back to TMD SAS. They have a lot of resources regarding how the regular match process works when you get closer to time to that. I think certainly it's not over regarding interviews. So you might still get an interview that you get picked up with between now and when you have to submit your match list. All I can do is you can do whatever we've done earlier with regards to sending appropriate follow-up communication that is concise and professional, doesn't make you sound, and it does not make you sound at all desperate. And just sort of, be cool about it and just let the process run one way or another. If you're not successful with the pre-match, be very familiar with what the regular matching process is, especially for those of you who are, again, Texas residents and did not pre-match. There will be a lot of explanation about how the match process works for you. And as I mentioned before, all of you who are non-residents that are applying to Texas schools, you should not be pre-matched at any point at this time. So you'll likely hear of your decision later on with the regular matching process.
Makes perfect sense. And yeah, to echo, TMD SAS has a wealth of resources within their site. When should I start thinking about reapplication? I don't think anybody wants to think about this, but we got to be strategic.
Yeah, nobody wants to think about this. So I'm only predominantly speaking to most of you who are applying to medical schools at this point. And I know we have a lot of traffic on our forums, and I'm sure elsewhere online, where a lot of people are just, panicking, anxious, frustrated about the lack of attention that they have received regarding an interview to this date. So for sure, we've fielded our fair share, and we will certainly welcome any more people who post their anxiety about the fact that they've heard nothing from any of the schools that they've applied to. When should they start thinking about reapplying? Well, certainly it depends on your own situation, but the rule of thumb for most of us who are experts on SDN, Student Doctor Network, we usually will tell people, it's not, don't panic too quickly. Really, you should start thinking about your reapplication and looking at your profile as soon as, one, you've gotten any feedback from any school saying you've been rejected. And two, of course, if you haven't heard back from anybody, usually, if Thanksgiving rolls around and you've got no interviews, at least no interviews that are scheduled, that's likely a really good time to really think very hard about a reapplication. Now, regardless of whatever your status is, every one of you who is applying should still be doing whatever you can to maintain and build your profile regarding your clinical experiences and your community service non-clinical experience activities. That should still be going on regardless, just because you want to have those additional hours if you do wind up reapplying. And certainly, those are things you're going to be doing. Many of those things you're going to be doing once you're in medical school anyway. So there's no harm done for you to continue doing that. But in terms of when to think about a reapplication, for sure, if schools have rejected you, you can reach out to see if they do any sort of, more specific, counseling. I'm sure that if they don't, they will say the same thing, and your own weaknesses just as well, regarding what your metrics say, regarding what your hours are, or whatever else. And so sometimes it's pretty obvious if you've been rejected without an interview that you have certain things that you need to work on. Keep working on it. But in terms of due seriousness, make sure that when Thanksgiving runs around, if you are going to reapply to AMCAS, you'll probably want to really think very carefully about reapplying to AMCAS at that time point. Furthermore, you still, if you have not applied to ACOM or the DO schools, it's not too late with Thanksgiving being the submission timeline. A lot of schools still are trying to fill interview spots in the spring. And for many DO schools, because of the way the pecking order of schools really work, and especially the newer schools, they are really, really dead set on trying to fill as many seats in their class as possible. So to that degree, DO is still an option, and you have to make a decision, especially considering the financial challenges that we're going to be approaching, whether it's important for you to start being a medical student now, whether or not it's an MD program or a DO program, or do you really want to try and reapply, or do you need to reapply and go through a post-bac program, a gap year, growth year opportunity, whatever you need to do. But for the most part, you probably do want to have your plans, begin your plans by around Thanksgiving. Now, granted, you can still get an interview after Thanksgiving, after Christmas, because again, offers are still rolling. It's always possible that any of you who have not heard from anybody, you might get a really, really late spring or winter spring interview. And we have plenty of stories online and other anecdotal stories of people who didn't get an interview until February, but that February interview, they got an offer off of that regardless. So, and it was their only interview that they had the whole entire cycle. That's where they went. It just kind of happens that way. And, as much as, we want to have things be defined for us, in terms of our outcomes as early as we possibly can, and that's reasonable and rational. This process doesn't always lend itself very much to that. So just be very careful about it, and, starting to think about it early. Yeah, that's probably what you're going to have to do. Certainly around Thanksgiving, all the way through Thanksgiving and Christmas break.
Okay. So next question. I've received an interview for later this fall or winter. Can I tell them I'm available to interview sooner if the opportunity arises? Because none of us want to have to wait around that long.
Yeah, so this applies to everybody, and especially for those of you in any of the health professions programs where offers are now being extended. You can always check. Usually, like I would certainly say, on the same cadence as I mentioned before, when you're doing a check-in or your letter of interest or updates or whatever. If you did wind up with an interview scheduled for, let's just say, January or February at this point, because offers are now being extended out, many spots might actually open up because people who already got into schools that are on their high on their priority list probably don't want to go to all of their other interviews, because they really aren't truly that interested in going to those schools. So it is a good idea to figure out from each of the schools that you are waiting to hear from, or at least you've already heard from, on what a process could be about. Hey, I'd like to see if I could get an earlier interview spot. What would I need to do? What sort of things should you consider? Now, there are also many people who have interview spots that need to reschedule, so they need to push it to be a little bit later because, I don't know, they have a project that they're doing. Certainly earlier during the summer, we have people working that are, not available during certain times of the year, certain months when a spot was available. So, for those of us who have to organize interview days, we need to make sure all of our interview spots are taken. And so check with each school that invited you for interview and see what their process is if you are able to schedule, move up in the schedule if you wanted to. Does this really make a difference one way or another about your file review? Well, kind of course, in terms of the fact that your file can be considered a little bit earlier than it was before, but just do whatever you can to make things as convenient as possible for you within whatever constraints the other school has. So yeah, I would certainly say if they have rules that say you can't do it, this is the only date we have. There's no reason why you can't otherwise signal to them that you would love to be on some wait list for a spot that opens a little bit earlier in time within reason. So it just doesn't hurt to ask.
Okay, so again, just be brief and professional and not come across as crazy.
Yeah, that's pretty much it.
Okay. Simple enough in theory. Any questions you guys have, again, please drop them in the chat. So when do I need to submit a deposit for an AA Comes program?
So for those of you who are fortunate to have gotten an offer from a DO program to date, you should be at least familiar with what we call the traffic rules, the acceptance protocols for people who've been accepted to a DO program. Now, they are not enforceable rules, but it is expected. ACOM expects, as all of the member institutions that use ACOMAS to follow the general guidelines that have been laid out regarding what is appropriate, an appropriate timeline to hear back from people for whom you have extended offers early in the process. So pay attention to the timeline that is spoken about for ACOMAS for what they call their traffic rules or their traffic guidelines. I believe, if I'm not mistaken, if you have been extended an offer currently or even before today, there's a deadline, I believe, of November 15th or December 15th. It's usually one or the other. Check the traffic rules, but in theory, you are not to be compelled to submit your enrollment deposit until that date. Like, I think it's December 15th. I'm not entirely sure. Again, check the website about that. So that's when you ideally need to submit a deposit to a school. Please understand that the deposits, for the most part, are non-refundable for ACOMAS schools. And they do happen to be somewhere in the neighborhood of about $1,000 or thereabouts, a little bit more than that, depending on the school. The school should tell you how much it is. And, they'll tell you exactly what the appropriate payment is. And it's usually not a credit card. So they usually want something in the form of verifiable registered cash, or some sort of a cash payment or transaction. So, follow those instructions very carefully about that so you can properly secure your seat. Understand that deadlines are very important things, and that if you miss a deadline, you put your possible seat at risk and it could be given to somebody else. So, please be very mindful. Don't wait until the deadline to submit your money. You give yourself a few more days. You just want to make sure you don't miss the deadline for reasons that you can't control. So just pay attention to the ACOMAS traffic rules. And if there are any questions, or there seems to be some schools that want to deviate from that, then you can see what you can do to ask. I was hoping you would follow the ACOMAS traffic rules. I was anticipating having that much time in order for me to send you a deposit. Is that okay? Again, back to concise and professional. Don't sound desperate when it comes to any of your follow-up communications. Everyone will definitely appreciate it, and you might be surprised to what degree a program will be flexible. Because again, DO schools need to fill their spots, and I know as much as we all don't like people sort of dragging us around unnecessarily. It is very important that, again, if you do a lot of things on good faith, that you will be rewarded for it. So just make sure that everybody, if you know that someone is deviating a little bit from the ACOMAS traffic rules, just check and see if they would be okay for you to be able to comply with the ACOMAS rules or not. If they don't, then that's something you'll just have to figure out for yourself and pay the deposit earlier than ACOMAS's traffic rules state. But it is the school that ultimately, I guess, instructs you on what you should do. And if that's where you want to go, you need to follow what they're telling you.
Okay, so it sounds like they want payments that can't be later disputed.
Pretty much, yes. Mm-hmm.
It does make sense. All right, next question. Can I hold multiple acceptances? When do I need to pick one? Sounds like a good problem to have.
It's a very good problem to have, and I think many of you who are going to come out of this month who've interviewed at a lot of places may find yourself in a fortunate position where hopefully you have multiple acceptances. If not, you might have multiple wait lists, and that's a little bit of a different question to pursue here. But for those of you who are lucky enough to have multiple acceptances, can you still hold them? How long? And when do you need to pick one of these schools? Well, for those of you in the AMCAS process, this is why Choose Your Medical School was created. Theoretically, you can hold on to as many of those offers as you can until you get to the Choose Your Medical School process, where then they will ask you ultimately to winnow it down to 3 schools and then the 1 school that you're going to be attending. That's going to come down a little bit later in time. I would certainly say, you can hold multiple acceptances, but I encourage you, for the benefit of the sanity of the rest of your peers who are waiting for at least interviews, if not also offers, to get off of the offer wait list, or whatever you want to call that. The fact that you're holding multiple acceptances means that somebody else can't get off a wait list and get an offer. So this is one of the integrity pieces that we like to tell people who are applying to medical school to keep in mind, that if you hold multiple acceptances, you do hold a lot of other people's futures in your hands, and you want to hopefully have good karma and make sure that you can come to a decision as quickly as you can. Now, that being said, I totally get, especially in the current environment, people like to hold on to multiple acceptances until you get your financial aid package, you do your calculations on whether something at the last minute pops up which requires you to go to one place rather than another, someplace closer to home versus further away, or vice versa. In which case, yeah, you can hold multiple acceptances and make sure that come January or February, you have a better idea of what your circumstances are, so you can make a specific choice. Again, you could do that. There's nothing wrong with it on the AMCAS side of the house until we start getting into the Choose Your Medical School timeline. But again, for the sake of your other peers, try to get to 1 school as soon as you can, just so that other people can have the benefit of a little bit of time to plan their start of medical school as well. So do what you can to just narrow it down to one. You won't be compelled until much later in time.
All right. And last question we've got here: what if I'm holding acceptances at a DO program, but I'm waiting for an MD decision?
So here's one of those tricky things where, okay, you have the AMCAS traffic rules and you have the ACOMAS traffic rules. And one of the things that you need to know for sure is there's no way, unless you're applying to Texas schools, schools that are in AMCAS do not know what you're doing in ACOMAS and vice versa. So it is always theoretically possible for you to hold a DO acceptance and an MD acceptance at the same time. And you could string that along as long as you possibly can, because if you only have one MD program, you can go through the choose your medical school process. And in theory, you can hold on to both acceptances as long as you possibly can. I don't recommend it because that's also a lot of money that you ultimately have to throw down, because the DO schools want a pretty significant and hefty enrollment deposit very early in the process. And again, that deposit is non-refundable. So if you give them money, you're not going to ever see it if you decide to go to a different program. Deposits for AMCAS schools are run a little bit differently. But once you go beyond a certain point in time, they're going to start demanding not just the enrollment deposit, but also your tuition deposit as well. So if you are holding an acceptance to both DO and MD for whatever odd reason, obviously choose. It would always be a really good idea to just keep yourself down to one school at a time that you know you're going to plan on attending, that you're going to send them money for tuition deposits and enrollment deposits and other things like that. So we would always encourage you to try to keep everything down to a choice of one whenever you possibly can. But can you hold a DO and an MD program acceptance at the same time? In theory, you can, but at some point you can only go to one medical school. And again, no one has unlimited money or wants to deal with the consequences of financial aid packages like that. So.
Makes sense. So it sounds like the old adage of just apply places where you'd actually want to go is really true.
Yeah, and hold acceptances to places you really want to go as well. Don't just. There's a lot of people that like to hold multiple acceptances for the purposes of, quote, negotiating financial aid. There's different situations where you have to do that. There's some schools that never ever negotiate financial aid, as an example. That's probably a little bit of a different discussion one needs to have when you look at your costs of attendance, and if you do have multiple choices in terms of where you want to go to medical school, you probably need to do your own calculation of what the actual cost of attendance will be, especially when you have to travel to and from home to that school. And so I don't know what your circumstances are for that, but if you are lucky enough and you have more than one offer, you can give yourself a little bit of time to really determine what's the best financial option for you. Some schools probably will not decide scholarships until they see an enrollment deposit. Some don't care, and they're for different reasons. You just have to kind of play the game as you can, but in the end, you do need to make a decision.
And even in terms of negotiating, there's going to be a long list of people who are willing to pay a full ticket. So don't overextend yourself. This is not a job offer.
Right.
All right. That was all the questions we had here. Dr. Chuck, any parting shots on this topic?
Well, I wish you luck. I hope many of you get at least one offer, and chances are for many of you, who are in this process, sometimes you only get one interview, and many of you only get one offer off of that one interview too. So if it's only one, don't lose hope. Don't think that it's any sort of indication of your value as a future doctor. Remember that a lot of schools will pick you because they see a lot of promise in you in terms of thriving in their school. It's not necessarily any measure whatsoever that you're, quote, a good student or not, depending on the school. So just keep your options open, keep open-minded, keep busy. Don't always just hang out on the internet and on social media all the time. And certainly don't try to compare yourself with other people in this whole process. That's definitely gonna, go down a very, very uncomfortable road later on. So focus on what you're able to do, and cheer other people on who may ultimately be your classmates and certainly your peers. But the process will run, and just at some point you just have to trust the process, but stay professional, stay very concise with your communications, and don't forget, the evaluation does not stop. How you communicate with them after your interview is still part of your file. So don't forget that, and keep yourself above water and as professional as you possibly can.
Good advice. Yeah, don't hang out on social media, guys. Absolutely don't do that. All right, Dr. Chuck, thank you for taking the time to speak with us about that. Good luck to everyone who is currently in the application spin cycle. I am there with you. And just, you got to remember, it's going to end eventually. So again, Dr. Chuck, thank you. Hope everybody's learned something here tonight, and have a great rest of your night.